Hi, and welcome to Eminent Americans. I'm your host, Dan Oppenheimer, the lesser of two evils of the contemporary American intellectual scene. My guest on the show today is a very special guest. It is audio producer Robert Scaramuccia, my longtime collaborator on the podcast. Robert is leaving me at the end of this episode, so that's sad, but the happy part is that it's so that he can get a healthy work-life balance in place in advance of starting an MFA writing program in the fall, so I am excited for him, sad to see him go, but happy that he's moving on to bigger and better things. Robert and I talk about some of the things you'd expect, like our experience of working together, his thoughts on Eminent Americans, his plans for the future, etc. But we also, and I didn't plan this at all, but it was very fortuitous, we end up focusing a fair amount on a topic that I've thought about addressing on the show in the past, but just have never pursued because I didn't see an obvious way in. And that topic is video games. Turns out that Robert, I didn't know this about him, Robert is wholly fascinated with video games. They're pretty much exclusively, to this point, his engagement has been as a player of them, but his hopes going into the MFA program is to write about them seriously, and perhaps also at some point produce really good podcasts on them, which is just to say he is super serious about video games, kind of intellectually, aesthetically, personally, socially. Video games even played a role, and we get into this a little bit, in him dealing, kind of grieving or pre-grieving the death of his mother. So this is not a small thing for him. I have never been a serious gamer, but I'm interested in it. You know, it was in the mix with my friends when I was growing up, not at the center of our kind of social existence, but certainly, significant element of it. It now has a significant presence in the social lives of my 10 and 15-year-old sons. And I'm aware, of course, that it's just this huge thing in the social and emotional world of young people in particular, and in particular boys and young men, and then increasingly not so young men in our country. It just seems to me a topic that hasn't received nearly the degree of serious literary and journalistic attention that it clearly deserves. I've seen a few very good documentaries about different aspects of gaming, but I haven't read much where people really get into it in the way that I kind of like writers to get into things. And I think it deserves a lot of ink. It gets a lot of ink in a certain sense, but so much of it seems to me pretty shallow, although Robert pointed out that there's more going on, I think particularly in the kind of independent space of podcasting and newsletter writing that I'm aware of. But the stuff in the mainstream media seems to not be interested in grasping or reckoning with the things that I'm interested in, that I think actually people who play games would be most interested in, which is the role that they play in the social and psychological lives of the people who play them. So that's a lot of what Robert and I get into. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I know I really did. Apologies in advance as the pace of the release of podcasts slows down for a bit. I'm still working on finding a new producer. I have some good leads. I'm optimistic, but for a little while, at least I'll be on my own. And so I will not be as prolific. I am not going away, though. I am still enjoying this process immensely and hope to keep doing it indefinitely. Peace. Robert Scaramuccia, welcome to Eminent Americans. Welcome as a guest. You have been a participant and collaborator for a long time. I hereby anoint you, I sort of belatedly anoint you an Eminent American by the power vested in me by the brotherhood and sisterhood of MFA alums, in the knowledge that you will soon be attending, that you are leaving me for MFA land, although I guess when last we spoke, it was to be determined which program. Is there any further developments on that front?
Gosh, well, first of all, Dan, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be on this side of the microphone for this esteemed podcast. Are there any developments? You know, you're actually catching me in perhaps the most up in the air period of my life, at least within the last couple of years, where I just got in off the wait list at one program. And so now I have like two roads in front of me that I have to decide. Do we go with the more artistically fulfilling route? Do we go with the more financially viable route? What actually leads to a good and productive and creatively fulfilling life? At the end of the day, I truly have no idea. So, who knows what's going to happen?
Oh, don't worry about the money. Just go for the fun one. Go for the one that's the most romantic. Sorry, this is the bad advice that I gave myself back when I was facing that same decision. And as I think I said to you recently, I mean, I've been paying for it for literally decades, and then the Biden administration just magically paid off the last 40,000 of it maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And if there's anything that the federal government should be spending money on, it's rescuing an upper middle class asshole like me from the remainder of my debt. But nonetheless, I mean, who might look a gift horse in the mouth?
Exactly. Well, perhaps, maybe I follow my heart right now, and then I hope that the 2032 Ocasio-Cortez administration pays off my loans, and then who cares? You know what I mean? It's fine.
We didn't map out too much of an agenda for this conversation other than I'll ask you a bunch of questions. You'll ask me a bunch of questions. We will just go where the spirit takes us. What's a question for me? You have not been working with me from the beginning, but for I don't know, it's been like a year and a half or something like that,
Yes.
that you've been editing. My voice has been living in your head in a particularly intimate, possibly occasionally excruciating way. But what do you want to know from me?
Can we start with how you let the spirit move you in these conversations? What I'm struck by as an editor is you select a guest, you talk to the guest, and then you send me the file of your conversation. And so I am handed, depending on the conversation, a file that is like an hour and a half long, an hour and 50 minutes long, something. And then I cut it down as much as needed, which is sometimes more, sometimes less. And I guess what I'm struck by is just how often it sounds like, at least to me, you have a vague outline of where you want to go. But then the conversation will go somewhere totally different because somebody will say something and you will grasp onto it. And then you'll be talking about that for 20 minutes. And then you'll kind of go back to the original. And I guess what I'm struck by is like how often it actually works. I am somebody who also has a foot in like the narrative scripted podcast space. When I'm in front of a microphone or editing somebody who's in front of a microphone, I often kind of like to know, okay, this is exactly where we're going, and this is what's going to happen, and here are the beautiful things that will come out of it. And I feel like you give yourself and your guests like so much space and room. How do you know that's not just going to fall flat on your face?
Yeah, I have a few different answers to that question. So one is that I'm a pretty serious listener to podcasts and have been for a while. Maybe not I don't know if I was an early adopter, but I'm a pretty serious podcast listener. And I listen, as I'm sure you do, with a fairly critical lens and just an attunement to when am I interested, when am I bored. There's different buckets of podcasts that I find compelling, and they're in a sort of crude sense. There's the very planned out one, right? Something like Fresh Air with Terry Gross, which I like a lot. I think hers is pretty planned. I think she is attuned. I mean, I think what's one thing that's nice about her, she is attuned to the moment. So there are moments that are unexpected and spontaneous, but one still feels that in that context, she has a certain number of beats she wants to hit. Somebody has a movie coming out, they have a book coming out, something like that. She's going to hit some beats, and she has a responsibility, I think, to the NPR listener to not assume that they have that much prior knowledge about this thing going in. And she needs to kind of lay the table for the guests so that they can give the listeners the kind of the key information. That's one. She does that exceptionally well. I think she also has very good editors. I mean, somebody was telling me when I did that Terry Gross episode that she really does record long. She'll often ask the same questions again if she doesn't get the answer she wants. She'll often ask kind of offbeat questions just to see if they produce an interesting answer, and then they don't, and then maybe the third one does. So that's what ends up making the episode. So that's one model. And then the other model I think of is kind of the Marc Maron model. I mean, Marc Maron very much, I don't know if he underprepares, but he certainly doesn't overprepare unless it's somebody like who he's been listening to or watching just sort of his own volition for decades, right? He goes in with a kind of general sense he's read the Wikipedia page, and he's very attuned to both his own interests and to kind of when something is coming up for the guests. And he's just good at it, right? He's just good. I mean, he's done a lot of radio. He's not an improv person, but I think as a comedian, he often goes up on stage and kind of has a few broad ideas and then just kind of sees where they go. And so it suits his kind of temperament. And so as a result, sometimes he gets just really amazing stuff out of people. I'm not sure who else. You may have some other senses of who else is good at that. I'm drawn to that. My wife is also a therapist. And so I'm drawn to the idea of like being in the moment in a conversation and seizing on to when you sense there's energy, whether it's energy because there's resistance, somebody kind of deflects something, or it's because there's a kind of extra note of enthusiasm. And so I would say it's a mix of like, as I often think it is for Marc Maron, although I think he's more indulgent of his own enthusiasms. I think for good reason. He's a more interesting, charismatic performer than I am. So there's space for that. But I'm both indulgent of my own enthusiasm. And then I'm also try to be attuned to those just kind of moments. And it's because I just like, one of the things that just bores the hell out of me in podcasts is when I know where it's going. also when somebody used this metaphor for like, when you know that the guest is just queuing up track 3, right? When I am asked this question, this is the answer I give. There's nothing that bores me more quickly than that. And so I don't have a tolerance for it. And so I didn't know when I went into this, honestly, whether I'd be good at it or not. I could be better, but I think I'm pretty good at it. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the answer. That's the answer to your question, is just like, it's one of those things where I just wanted to host the podcast that I wanted to listen to.
No, I mean, that totally makes sense. And I think, indulging what you're interested in, I mean, that's also like a question that I am facing right now as I embark upon a journey that you embarked upon, which is going towards an MFA in nonfiction creative writing, which to a lot of people probably sounds a little ridiculous at the end of the day, but it will rely on knowing what my taste is and being able to execute on that.
Yeah.
This is actually something that I think came up in one of your previous Eminent Americans episodes with Blake Smith, where he was like, it is insane that we will go to an editor and say, hey, I'm going to read these 5 books. And a month from now, once I'm done with that, I'm going to have something interesting to say that will fit into 3,000 words, and you will publish it. And somebody along the line will make money from that. And you kind of came back at him with like, I mean, is that insane? You've been doing it for years.
Right.
And I'm kind of hearing something similar here, whether it's writing, whether it's podcasting, is like, maybe at some point you just got to trust your stuff. But I don't know. Like, I'm someone who, like, I know I can write a sentence, but like I often get stuck at all of the steps that come before that. How do you build that up to know, like, oh yeah, no, it'll probably be fine?
Well, it's funny because I think I know it now. I certainly have known it for a lot longer with writing than with podcasting. I mean, at some point you do get to the point when you're good and you've done it for long enough that you have, most of us, I think, have a certain faith in our capacity to deliver. But I certainly remember, like you, earlier in my development, when you have to just operate, I think, in this scary space where I kind of think the only way to ultimately having a successful career, not however you define successful, but if you define successful as actually being proud of what you're doing and doing something meaningful and true to you, the only way, to it is through, right? It is to do it in the absence of, unless you're a total prodigy, Jonathan Safran Foer or something, who had a mature voice at 23, is to just keep pushing and hoping that you get there, that you hope that you get that trust in your own sensibility and that you can deliver. But yeah, you have to just keep doing it and keep plugging away for all these years when, the most you can often hope for is that sometimes it hits, right? And I don't know. There's no magic formula for how to get to that. It's interesting. I was talking to Mark, to my brother, who's how I came to know you kind of in multiple ways. But you were a student of his in his English 120 class.
Yes, the very first class I ever took at Yale started at 9 a.m. on a Monday. I got there probably about 9:05, and that's how I met Mark. Yeah.
So this is what he said to me this morning. I happened to be talking to him. I was like, you know more about Robert than I do. Let me ask you some questions about him. But he told me an interesting story, which is relevant to this, and I'm curious your reflections on it. He said his memory is the first paper you handed in was something about how you basically for the last 6 years had just been playing video games with all your free time. And now it was time to get serious, right? And actually try and learn. And he said he made a point of reaching out to you and saying, just so you know, this is good. There's something there. And I know exactly what he means. There is a voice, there is a sensibility there, there's a view of the world, and a person who has the capacity to translate that into language. Now, it might be the case that if you look back on that, you'd be embarrassed because it's rough in all sorts of ways. But the thing that Mark identified is the thing that makes the difference between somebody who's actually someone who other people want to listen to or read and somebody who's boring. And I think I had some of that too in a sort of totally sporadic way. Like, I think I probably wrote things when I was 18 or 15 where somebody could look at it and say, this kid's got it. But that was then, 3% of my output, and the other 97% for one reason or another kind of sucked or something like that. So I don't know. Do you feel like when he said that to you, do you remember him saying that to you?
I remember in some sense. Like, I certainly remember writing the essay, handing it in, not knowing if it was any good or anything. And then, yeah, I mean, he and I, like, Mark in many ways is the reason why I'm even at this point of like, oh no, yeah, let's go for this MFA. Let's try to do it. Maybe there's something here. I think you bringing that up, what that prompts for me is almost like the curse of an Ivy League education, which is just such an annoying thing to say out there. Obviously, it comes with a lot of privilege, blah, 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 blah.
Blah, blah, blah. Tell me what you're feeling. Yeah.
Exactly. But what I'm actually feeling is that, like, putting it in exactly those terms, oh, yeah, I spent the last few years playing video games and now it's time to get serious. I think going to Yale was something that told me it really is time to get serious, do this, this, and this. And I've been trying to unlearn since I graduated years ago. Like, oh, wait, hold on. Maybe it's time to get unserious and actually the more interesting things. Like, my hope is to write about the video games and to do it in an interesting way and to follow my taste and whatever. And also, like, I don't know, it's a wonderful thing to go to this school and meet all these people. But then, all of your friends are doctors and lawyers and consultants and computer scientists. They're all already making six figures. And it can be such like a very particular world to be like, why didn't I go to Deloitte or something right afterwards, And so I feel like, and I finally feel like I'm there. It's taking me, yeah.
It's funny because it's probably even worse than that because you probably, how many years out are you?
I graduated in 2019, so about 7.
I was going to say there will come a point where you have peers who are actually, not only are they at Deloitte or like McKinsey or Cravath Swaine or something, they're at like NPR.
Yes.
and the New Yorker, right? It's like,
oh, trust me, that also happened immediately.
Right. Right.
There is someone, and hey, somehow if you're listening, I hope you're doing great.
Right.
There's someone from that same English 120 class with Mark who almost immediately ended up at the New Yorker. And so it's like, oh, well, we started in the same place freshman year. Right. And but that was not my path right out of college. And turns out, as everybody in the world already knows, that is completely fine. Nobody actually gives a crap. What do I actually want to make in the world in order to feel creatively fulfilled and I don't know. It's a shitty place out there to just add something good to it and help build a little bit of empathy or something with the talents that I have. The only way that I can think to do that right now, other than I don't know, whatever, going and volunteering, being a good person, blah, 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 is how can I write something either based on my own experience or that helps document the experience of somebody else that just adds a little bit of freaking humanity to the world. And for me, that will probably be through video games in some way if I have my way. But
yeah, look, I 100% feel that way. I mean, I would even abstract it out of one further removed from add some humanity to the world. I don't even know what to call that. I just have a basic faith that if we do something that's real to us, and if we're talented, that the thing we put into the world adds value to the world. I don't even put a name on what that thing is, right? It's it adds value to the world. And I think it's also a fairly virtuous is the wrong way because that points towards sort of ethics or something like that. It's just a good way to live, right? And I don't think it discharges whatever our obligation to our fellow citizens, our fellow humans, but I just put that in a different category, right? We have an obligation to our fellow citizens to try and make this a better country or something like that. We have an obligation to our partners and our children to be there for them. But those are distinct realms of human endeavor. And I think if you choose to do art of some form, I'm not saying there's nobody who's motivated by social justice who goes out there and somehow does amazing investigative work. But I just think it's bad to try and game it in that way. Figure out what you have that's unique to say, that's reflective of your unique vision, put it out there into the world. Good things will accrue. I don't know what they are. Yeah. And it's to your point, it could be for you video games. You're going to add much more value to the world writing about video games in an interesting and compelling way than trying to shoehorn yourself into some abstract notion of what you should be doing. I'm reminded of this, and I go back to this on that point of unlearning things. This story that I probably talked about on this podcast before, but George Saunders has talked a lot about, I think when he applied to the MFA program at Syracuse, he submitted a story that was kind of a clear, earlier version of the kind of stuff that he's now famous for. And then he went to Syracuse and learned to try and write like Raymond Carver, and then spent years after Syracuse trying to learn to write like Raymond Carver or Hemingway or whoever was big at the time, right? And had almost no success and was working a job as like a surveyor or engineer or something like that. And then finally wrote a story that was more in that vein that we know of George Saunders, fun, absurdist, a little sentimental, and submitted it to the New Yorker and is accepted. And, he was off and running and something what do you feel like you're unlearning? I mean, you brought up the fact that you go to Yale and you're surrounded by all these people who are being successful in these sort of conventional paths. So one thing I'm guessing you're unlearning is just to sort of oppress yourself with the anxiety, the insecurity of, I am not doing those things. Do you think are there conceptual things you have to unlearn? You have to unlearn that video games is not serious or something like that, or you're not being a good person, or you're not discharging your privilege adequately unless you're podcasting or writing about some social justice issue. I don't know. What do you have to unlearn?
Right. I mean, I think all of those things are probably swirling around somewhere.
Yeah.
I do fundamentally, yes, on the video games point, I do think it's fully like I've always thought of it as some sort of unserious thing to do. You know, even when I was choosing where to go for undergrad, it was between Yale and NYU. And it really felt like if I go to NYU, like they have video game journalism classes there, you know, they offer a lot of classes on a lot of different interesting things. And I see that road less traveled for myself over there of like, oh, going there and being told this is good and valid and go for it, and then following that path. And I think in choosing Yale, I was like, oh no, well, this is an august place. I fell into like radio journalism, all of that. It's like,
and I think I think you're kind of saying this implicitly, like that was actually the right decision for that time.
Yeah.
Because when you come back to, I don't know if you have yet, when you come back to like writing or podcasting about video games, you will have a much greater sensibility formed by literature, by great literature and whatever, producing my podcast for a year and a half and all of these things that you'll be able to bring to the art of and the craft of writing about video games that will really enrich your work, right? Like it probably wouldn't have been the right move to go right to NYU and just start writing about that stuff right away without knowing anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like the thing that I told myself, the most high-minded version of like, oh, why I chose to go to Yale at that moment was like, because I had spent my whole life being a frickin' valedictorian. And like, eventually that just messes you up at a certain point. If I go to Yale, I will no longer be the smartest person in these academic settings. And that will probably be good for me.
Interesting. You think you were that cognizant at that point of like the worry about, did you edit my Deresiewicz? I forget if you edited my Deresiewicz episode.
I think so. Bill Deresiewicz, if you're listening, I've edited like 3 episodes with you. Yes.
Right.
3 different
like,
shows. Yeah.
It sounds like you had some self-awareness. Like, I do not want to be, what was his word?
Excellent sheep.
Excellent. You did not want to be an excellent sheep.
Like, I want to say yes, but at the same time, I think I am at my most comfortable being an excellent sheep. Like, I mean, I absolutely. And this is more to do with what I put into my own education in K through 12, whatever. Like, I was so that kid of like, I only feel whole once you give me the good grade. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I had a little bit of the cognizance of like, I can't just go through life thinking that I am the best at these things. I need to be around all these kids who do many, many different things better. And yeah, I think going there was absolutely like a world expanding and a mind expanding time in a way that like any, you know, I studied American studies, any like liberal arts education will give you. But I just, at the same time, like there's just such an underbelly of ambition there that just, it made it so hard to be like, and you know what I'm going to do with this after studying with Mark Oppenheimer and Ann Fadiman is like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go work for like a hobbyist video game publication and take all of that with me.
Yeah.
When in reality, like, hey, that's fine. That's totally fine. Maybe you get that monkey off your back. You know what I mean? But it just took a while to get there.
Yeah. To your first question, like some of what I'm doing in these podcasts when I just go off in random directions is somebody says something that triggers in me this thought that I've had sort of bouncing around in my head for 30 years or 10 years that like there's literally nobody to share it with, right? And it's like, Robert, I could share it with Robert. Like he'll get it, right? And here is the thought, which is the thought I've always had about video game writing. And surely somebody has done this well, and I just haven't read it, and it's probably in a memoir, is I was not a hardcore gamer as a kid, but we spent a fair amount of time playing Madden football, playing FIFA soccer, playing NHLPA hockey, mostly sports stuff, but like whatever, some other ones too. And the experience, what I value so much from it was, and what was so interesting to me was the discourse that happened around it with my friends, right? It was a social activity. It was, we weren't yet doing it online, although it's still social with some of the online stuff, but like we were sitting in somebody's living room and they had this game console and we're just shooting the shit and making jokes, and we had in-jokes, and there was kind of like ongoing stories or, you know, discourses that were unique to us.
Yeah.
I think that's totally fascinating and super rich. I've never read anybody talking about that. And I think it's probably even more rich and baroque. And now that it's so much bigger a part of particularly young men's social life, like I came along before people were going off to college, and a big part of one's social life for a lot of people is all the guys on your floor or something are in a league or whatever. Like, and I don't know if that's still the case or not, but like there was clearly a period of time when that was the case. And so I think the social world around video games, particularly for young men, is super fascinating. And I've never seen anybody write about that, interestingly.
That is the world that I was in high school. You know what I mean? Like at a certain point, especially, it was like, okay, I've got a lot of homework to do, whatever. I don't really have time to hang out with people. The thing I have time to do is on Friday and Saturday nights, I'm going to turn on, at the time it would be the Xbox 360, and whoever is online, we are going to chat with each other while playing some random game. And like, it would have been much too gauche to like talk to each other on the phone. You know, we would have felt much too awkward doing that. But if we could just like shoot some aliens,
right, while talking
on the phone, yeah, and that's all it was. And yes, exactly, there's this entire world of in jokes and language, and then, you know, stranger danger, but like we had all of these friends who we had never met in real life, and you know, that leads to the group chats that you have, and those were the friends that I had. And that is the way that, like, you know, video games for me at one and the same time cultivated this social world for me. And even today, one of my best friends from Yale, like, the only way that we actually talk to each other is, oh, okay, yeah, it's 10 p.m. Let's hop on and play, I don't know, some Rocket League or whatever for a little bit. One and the same, it's this entire social world that was so important for me when I was younger. And there are games that just tell these sometimes complex and interesting and different stories, and you experience the story differently because of the interactivity element, of the fact that you are the one doing these things in some way. And like, often if you compare any game story or whatever to any great work of literature, whatever, it's all very basic and simple, but on its own terms and within its own world. It was also just a way for me when I was younger, and still sometimes today, you know, in the same way that like literature puts you into somebody else's head, games can do that literally. And I think that in a way that much of the world dismisses them as kind of what they are, but as opportunities for gambling and wasting time, there's something more there sometimes.
I'm curious what those games are for you. I have one old friend who clearly has that emotional relationship with games. And I don't get it, but not because I'm skeptical, just I think I'm not sure how many of those particular kinds of games that maybe tend to evoke that experience were around when I was playing video games, or maybe it's a temperament thing. But I'm curious what those games are for you. Like what one or two games come to mind that you have that relationship to?
A couple answers. One is a bit of a silly one, but there was a video game about a decade ago now that was a tie-in game in the Walking Dead cinematic universe.
Okay.
So you had the comics, you had the TV show, and then they had like a choose your own adventure game where most of what you're doing is going around in this zombie world and choosing your dialogue options, choosing how you're going to interact with people, what you're going to do in a given moment. And it just tells a beautiful story about this man and his like adoptive daughter in this zombie apocalypse. And that's a whole thing in the video game world right now, that we're far enough along in people who played video games when they were children now being the developers, that like almost every story in a big budget cinematic video game is about a father
and a daughter
guiding his daughter through the world. I mean, that is the Last of Us, which had a huge TV show adaptation. Right. The video game series God of War is a man and his child.
Has that been written about? I mean, that's when I think about video games, what I think is, and this is true in so many subcultures, right? Like, and it's because of the economics, but it's also just because of lack of sort of creativity or initiative on the part of writers, which is so much of the writing tends to cluster around certain kinds of things. And then the most interesting things, which is like that trope, the father and daughter in a sort of dystopian landscape or something like that, is, I mean, that's The Road too. Isn't that the McCarthy book? I think it was Fun or something like that. I don't know what the origins of it were. I mean, that's fascinating, right? I mean, the social world is fascinating. The experience that you're talking about, like, I don't know. I believe you. And it's like, you'll have to figure out what it is you have to say and what you have, but like to be able to translate to somebody who hasn't had that experience. It's partially, you know, one story is what is that experience like? But I think there's another question, which is almost like mechanically or technically, like how is that achieved? It's just a different medium, right? It's like, so one of the mistakes people make is they compare the prose of the video games to the, you know, a movie script or a novel script or something like that. And it tends to look kind of elementary, but that's like saying, well, even when you talk about songwriters like Bob Dylan, who are known as like poetic songwriters, if you put their strict lyrics up against those of truly one of the great poets, it looks like, pretty good, right? But it's not great, but it's the combination of their voice and the music and the lyrics that makes it as much of a work of genius as T.S. Eliot, even though the words on their own terms are not as great as T.S. Eliot, right? So it's obvious it's the same thing, right? It's the mechanics of video games plus the words, plus the structure, plus the visuals. All of those things are working together to create the emotional experience in the player. That is a very hard thing to explain, right?
Yes.
Like, you'd have to just have a deep insight about You'd first have to have a deep insight about some aspect of how it's operating, and then you'd have to have the capacity with language to actually translate it into words that other people could absorb, right? I mean, that's whatever. That'd be fucking fascinating if somebody could do that.
You're laying it all out right now, and I'm like, oh, well, there's a world where the next 20 years is me trying to crack that code of how do you actually prove that it's interesting to somebody who doesn't have that experience of it. The other game I was going to mention is this little game called To the Moon. It's a mobile game. I don't know if it's on other platforms, but I played it on my phone. I played it when I studied abroad in Cambridge for summer. So I was in England. I was kind of partly getting away from, to be honest with you, like a home situation where my mom had a long-term illness for many years. And so she was in the hospital doing like physical rehab, all that sort of stuff. And I kind of had this release of like, oh, let me go to merry old England and have a time and look out at the River Cam and think some thoughts and whatever. And I was at the end of that study abroad experience. I was staying in some random British dude's Airbnb. And he was like, hey, do you want to go to the pub, get a drink? This is back when Airbnbs were like all in somebody's living room or whatever, as opposed to being their own rooms. And I was like, nah, man, I'm tired. I got a flight in the morning, whatever. And so he went out and I was just in this little like closet of a room. And I pulled out this game on my phone called To the Moon. And I barely remember what it was about at this point. But what you do, there's like an old man on an island who is sick and dying, and he is remembering his wife who passed years before him. And so it's this sad, maudlin little story. It's only about 2 hours long. And something about the things that they have you do, exactly the mechanics in this game, where you need to go like fix the lighthouse that's on his island so that at the end he can go and get in his wheelchair and look out at it as the sun sets and then the game is over. Like something about that experience truly, I mean, it wrecked me in like the best way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I came to the end of that and was like, oh, yeah. I have a parent who I'm probably going to lose relatively soon. And this helped me to process it. And it wasn't just the story and the little text bubbles and whatever, because that was pretty basic and elementary. It was doing the little adventures to help this old man or whatever, even though I'm just like tapping on my phone.
Yeah.
And like, there's like magic in there that is only in that medium. And I don't know.
Because you're the agent, right? I mean, that must be part of it, because you're the agent, you're actually doing the thing. And obviously in like, other forms of art, like we are identifying with the various protagonists, but maybe there's something different about being the person. There's some deeper sense of identification about, wow, that's intense. I mean, did you cry? Yeah. Were you crying? Like, when you?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. Were you thinking about your mom dying? Or was it kind of only after the fact that you're like, oh, that's why I was, that's a big reason why I was so moved by this experience?
I mean, I think it was all kind of in there. I think it was still, we didn't know how much more time we had with her or whatever, and I think it still seemed like there would be more years than there ultimately were. And so I think I was thinking, oh, I'm going back into this home situation before gallivanting off to Yale a few weeks after that. But like, I'm going back into this situation that is at least dicey and difficult. But no, I mean, when I was playing the game, I had no idea where it was going to go or anything. And I do think it was only later and only right now, once it's really in the rearview mirror, that I know like, oh yeah, wait a second. I was probably coming to terms with something I didn't want to admit to myself was probably happening,
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's what freaking art does. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's interesting. Something I was thinking about, you said, I got to spend the next 20 years like cracking this code, which is one of the great things about my MFA experience, and I hope yours is, and this is very hard to get elsewhere in the world, was you go into workshop, you write this stuff, the constructive criticism is great, but I'm almost inclined to say the thing that's most valuable is people helping you identify where the spark comes in to your writing, where the thing is. And this example I always remember, I have a friend, Michelle Maisto. Michelle, I don't think you're a listener to this, but I'm still friends with her. But if you are, shout out to Michelle. And Michelle, and I don't think she necessarily, maybe she had this idea in her head when she came in, but it was certainly, if she did, it was certainly vindicated, was Michelle was just amazing at writing about food. She was a good cook. I think it was part of her family culture, but that's no guarantee, right? And when Michelle wrote about food, whether it was like going to the grocery store and describing kind of the colors and the textures and things like that, or a dinner that she prepared or a restaurant she went to, like there was just a life there, right? There was just a vitality there that if I tried to write about food, it would just be dead. Right. And so one of the things that Michelle got, and I think, again, I think she had some sense of that. She probably was writing about food sometimes because she knew she wanted to write about food. But it's like for some of us to, to go in there and to not know necessarily, like when I try and do this, like one of the things I really tried to do in that program was just write a lot of different kinds of stuff that I didn't know if I knew how to do to see what it felt like to me. But unfortunately, sometimes the case you don't know. Sometimes you're actually really onto something and you don't know, right? And so it's immensely valuable to have people, and you figure out who you can trust and who you can't trust. It's immensely valuable to have people say, right there, those paragraphs right there, like that was some good shit. And it's particularly valuable, and I think about what you often run into in writing groups outside of those structured situations is everybody's just blowing smoke up everybody's ass. So it's particularly valuable when the same people who are telling you, like, they're not literally, we weren't mean, but the same people are telling you, like, this is really flat, right? They're telling you this is shit. And the same people who are telling you that, and you're like, yeah, you're probably right, are also telling you, but here, that's incredibly valuable because that's such a clue to like, okay, there's something there. Maybe you know it already. But even then, it's valuable to have people affirm it. And maybe you didn't know that. So like when you're thinking about it, it's like, you're like, oh, I have next 20 years to unpack this. But the problem is unpack what, right? Unpack the social part of it, unpack what makes a good game versus a bad game, unpack that kind of emotional, the way in which being an agent in the video game connects you to the emotions of it differently than like, there's a whole universe there, right? And like, which part of it does Robert Scaramuccia have something interesting to say about? Because it's not all of it, right? It's just a thin slice of it. Mm-hmm. But like, if you can get there, then like, I can't guarantee you'll make a lot of money doing it because nobody's making a lot of money. Like all of 8 people are making a lot of money, but I can guarantee that you will be able to write or produce stuff, audio stuff or video or whatever, because who knows, right? That will be meaningful to other people and that will feel satisfying to you, right? But like, that's the challenge.
No, I mean, that's, I don't know, very useful to hear. There's a few different threads there, but yeah, I think what would be most useful to me is to end up in a room. And this is what I'm trying to think through as I visit these schools and make my final decision is like, what I need you guys to tell me is I have no external perspective on my writing, like at all right now. I don't fully understand, like, okay, I've been told that this is pretty good sometimes, but like, why, for what reason, what works and what doesn't? We're all paying to be in this room. Let's just be honest with each other about it.
I'm curious, is there a canon of people who write well about video games, or at least a self-assembled personal canon?
Yes. I want to say that it is hopefully growing. I hope to be part of like a rising wave of it. The only thing that I would really throw out in this context is there's an anthology that came out last year, the year before, that's called Critical Hits, Writers Playing Video Games or something, which is the closest that has come to like, this is a collection of, I'm trying to think the people who are in it. I mean, Hanif Abdurraqib has a really beautiful essay in that collection about the video game Red Dead Redemption 2 and about grief and all these other things. And there are a number of great essays within that collection. It's also like, if I can be dishy about it, it's also like quite uneven, in a way that like, okay, yeah, some of these get at what I want to be out there in terms of video games writing. And some of these, it's like, you asked famous writer, hey, you play video games sometimes, right? Can you write something? And they just, kind of just put some bullet points on a page and called it a day. And so the answer is like a little bit, but there's also just so much, probably like many other hobbyist sort of writing or journalism spaces or whatever. There's just like so much cruft you have to get through of like,
well, part of the problem is, I'm guessing, I'm 100% sure I say I'm guessing is like fashion journalism, I bet video game journalism, professional journalism is totally corrupt, fashion journalists, and there's a few exceptions to that, but the 99% of the fashion journalists, they're all in bed with. I mean, this is not like some secret. They're all in bed with the advertisers and it's not like the New York Times, right? Like, it's not like if you write about books, there's a ecosystem with a deep history of like independence from the industry about which you're writing. There is no history of that in fashion journalism. In fact, it's the opposite, and so it's the rare person. And it's probably. There are examples, but it's like for that reason, like a lot of the best writing you'll see about clothing and fashion will come in the New Yorker when, again, it'll be like you're saying, it'll be a writer that's not his beat or her beat or something like that. And they write about, like Janet Malcolm has a great piece on the brand Eileen Fisher. And I think Judith Thurman writes some good stuff. Like you'll see very smart people in that magazine writing about fashion, but you end up with things like, who's good at fashion writing? And, everybody will say, oh, Vanessa Friedman for the New York Times. Vanessa Friedman for the New York Times is like, fine. Like she's not corrupted, but like nobody will be anthologizing her. Like I'm not sure she's ever written a thing that you and I would be like, oh, this is like, whatever. She's very smart and she writes very professionally, but it's like, I'm sure the industry of video game magazines and blogs and all that is totally sort of corrupt in that way, that they just don't want to alienate the companies, and so much of their money is coming from, like so much of their advertising is coming from. I could be wrong, but that's my guess. There's probably a rich ecosystem of like amateurs writing about it with independent, but again, and that stuff is pretty amateur. So I don't know. It would not be surprising to me if, you were kind of basically saying this, that most of the good writing about it is people who they mostly write about other stuff and then they get an invitation to write for the New Yorker or for this anthology or whatever about the experience, right?
Yeah. Like there's probably more truth in that than I would like to admit, I would say, especially because like, again, a lot of my social world was video games growing up. A lot of my media world was all of the video game podcasts that are out there that talk about, oh, let's review this game, or let's just be chuckleheads for an hour talking about a game, kind of, but also just joke around and whatever. And like that, talk about parasocial relationships. Like that was my experience at podcasting for so long. And I think that a lot of those places, they do kind of rely on video game publishers to like send them the games early so that they can review them on the release date and all of these things. There is also, there's the whole controversy that's now a decade old called Gamergate that we do not have to get into here. So I think a lot of people would be quite prickly about what you just said, and for mostly good reason.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, I do think it does have a lot of the problems of, yes, we are reliant on these publishers and it's just all a big business and it's et cetera, et cetera. And I do actually, to bring it back to podcasting like a little bit, that like, yeah, I do think that the amateurs are kind of where it's at, and the people who I listen to, not just for fun, but for you have a deep analysis of this medium and of this particular game, are often people who used to be at big magazines and then they got shut down or laid off or whatever, and then started their own small thing where it's just like the three of them and they have a Patreon and it supports them. And I think that mirrors, a lot of where the podcast industry has gone over the past few years, where it's like, oh, it all used to be Amazon is throwing money into this. Gimlet is a big studio, blah, 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 blah. And now it's like, oh, that all cratered.
Right.
And so your options now are either to produce a video podcast, which please no, I'm sure people love them, but I'm good. As a producer, I don't want to do that. Or you have a bunch of people, and maybe Eminent Americans kind of fits into this a little bit, but a bunch of people who are like, yes, I am an independent producer. I'm just a few people, and we are going to make enough to justify doing this at the very least. And maybe that's all it needs to be.
Has there been a good serial podcast about video games?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. So ultimately, like the thing that I would love to do in the shorthand is This American Life, but for video games.
Yeah.
That kind of exists. It's called A Life Well Wasted, which is one of the best named podcasts I've like ever encountered. But it's kind of sporadically published. It started back in 2008. It's kind of still going, but in total, they probably have 15 episodes.
And they're like highly produced. They're kind of audio documentary style.
They're highly produced. The guy's done interviews and then he throws them together, does narration. Robert Ashley hosted that show. If you're listening, I think it's so wonderful. The ambitious, the Yale kid that's still in me is like, oh, but I think we could do this like every week. And I think it could be awesome, So like it kind of exists, but I want it to exist more. I don't know. I don't want to just like go fully two dudes on a podcast talking about how they could do things so much better than other people. But like maybe at least within our conversation here, I kind of started with this question of like, well, how do you know it's going to work for you? And I think like, I don't know, I can get stuck on like the insecurity and the whatever. And I think at a certain point, as terrible as it is, the feeling of like listening to something, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe Mark has said this to me in the past that like, sometimes somebody, a different writer, a different podcaster is just too close to your niche that it's friction. It's too grating and you actually don't want to engage with it. You don't want to read their cool video game memoir that they just published. Cause it's like, hey, you're in my lane or something like that. But like, there is something of like, oh, looking at this stuff and realizing, well, this is pretty good, but like, I think it could be better. Like and again, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a wonderful book that is ostensibly about video games, but it's also, and I don't know if you read that when it came out a couple years ago.
No, what is it? I don't even know what it is.
It's this wonderful book by the author Gabrielle Zevin.
Okay.
This book came out a couple years ago and it was hailed as like, finally the first great work of literature about video games. And I read it and I was like, okay, yeah, this is pretty good, but like, it's kind of about video games. Like it's about a bunch of different social issues rolled up into a book, which is maybe a lot of books of the last few years. And so it's like, I think it's wonderful, but I also think like, oh, but this doesn't get at the thing. This is not my experience and other people's experience of games. Anyway, just on the point of like, it's not there yet, but somebody could make this. And at a certain point, you just kind of have to have the egotistical confidence of like, well, what if we just go for it?
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying. I guess my feeling is if you're doing something good, there's no such thing as redundancy, right? And like, that there's redundancy when what you're putting out is kind of the formulaic thing, right? And then it just feels like this doesn't need to be in the world. Like if you did the thing that was true to your sensibility and you were able to kind of infuse talent and energy into it, even if there was another person who did it. I mean, look, it's nice to be first, right? Like, maybe you get more plaudits for it or something like that. But even if somebody else does something similar, part of me is like, those are both just adding value and integrity to the world in some way that's ineffable, but sort of meaningful. I mean, it reminds me a little bit, but it's not quite the same thing, which was like, I had to get to a certain point before I was kind of able to write about Dave Hickey in the way that I was comfortable with, because I was just sort of overwhelmed by the idea like, oh, this isn't going to be as good as what Dave has written. And it's like, yeah, probably not, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be good for what I'm able to do. It has to be good in my way. And then it's mostly irrelevant if it's as good as what Dave does.
Yeah. Ultimately, there are people out there who want to read that, who want to read about Dave Hickey, not in Dave Hickey's own words, right?
I mean, let me ask you, do you have projects in mind? So it sounds to me like what you said, like you also aren't sure whether the degree is going to be it's going to be a writing degree or a podcasting journalism degree. Like that's still to be determined. Mm-hmm. Do you have projects in mind? I mean, I didn't, and I don't think, you could say that was a kind of wasted few years. It wasn't, because there wasn't a project. I wasn't in the right spot yet. I think it's awesome if you have the project and then you can use that time, to just pour a ton of energy into whatever, producing the serial podcast or whatever. But, I don't think it makes sense to force it.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So like I would say I've got a few things in mind just because I felt like I had to in order to make my applications look good. Right. Fully subject to change. I could also just show up on campus and like, oh, let's do something totally different. I would be very happy to do that. The things that I have percolating in the background are essentially some sort of video game based memoir. This is again another thing that graciously I've stolen from Mark Oppenheimer. He and I were having a conversation once where he was just like, to a certain extent, a memoir is just 10, 20 page essays stitched together into a book. Right. So like, what if you just picked 10 games and put them onto 10 different eras of your life or whatever, which sounds conceited because I've only had so much of a life so far, but whatever. And just like made something out of that. So that is still very nebulous, but that's kind of like, I would love to come out of it with something approaching that, even if it fully changed over those couple of years.
Have you written any of those essays? Yeah.
Only in my head. You know what I mean? The classic, like, no, not at all. But it would be great to at least try a couple and be like, is there something here? So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the big one. Otherwise, I My mom was Cape Verdean, which is right. Cape Verde is an archipelago off the coast of Africa, an old Portuguese colony that gained its independence in the 70s.
I mean, I have heard those words in sequence, but I have no
Yeah,
visualization, conceptualization of mine.
no, absolutely. And I would say that's what most people say. Big population in Massachusetts and Rhode
Oh,
Island kind
interesting.
of
Okay.
came over for the cranberry bogs and the whaling industry and all of that. I want to do some sort of, whether it's in writing or podcast form. She was one of 8 siblings. And I think there's some worlds where like you could do mini biographies, like each episode is about a different sibling.
Uh-huh.
And it also tells you something about whether it's the history of Cape Verde as a country
Yeah.
or the Cape Verdean experience in America, which is very
Did they all come over?
yes, they all yeah. So some of them were born there, some of them were born here. This huge immigrant family in this very particular situation where like I mean Cape Verdeans are, you know, whatever. I'm only half Cape Verdean, but like we just don't fully map onto whatever say the American racial hierarchy is like or whatever. I don't know what terms to use.
In what sense? You mean it's just like I mean, I'm just thinking you don't look black in the way Nigerians do. You don't look North African in the way that Ethiopians do, or something like that. I mean, in that sense, just like facial features, skin tone. Or is it more of a? I mean, because there's always the experience of like Africans coming over here from whatever country, and the culture is very different from like native African American culture. But it sounded like you were saying something more different than that.
Yeah, and this is something that I'm at the very beginning of this, still thinking it through. And I mean, in the sense that like Cape Verde was a Portuguese colony for a number of years, and there was a lot of like intermixing there. Cape Verde, before the Portuguese showed up, was just a series of uninhabited islands. And then the Portuguese showed up and then it was part of the slave trade, brought people there. And so it's just this very,
Interesting.
let's call it interesting mix of peoples. And, so I don't know, like I have aunts and uncles who look black and I have those that don't. And like you said, I mean, I just kind of I don't even know, but like my dad was Italian. I just look like some random white guy.
Well, you look sort of swarthy maybe in the way that I do, which is
there you go. Yeah.
When I go to this, just happened. When I go to Mexico and I get tan, people start speaking to me in Spanish. But if I go to, Greece and get tan, people start speaking to me in Greek, right? I mean, you seem like you have that kind of like.
I've had that exact experience. Yeah.
Maybe there's something there, but it's in that kind of swarthy Mediterranean, olive skinned, maybe a little hairy sort of vague sense. Yeah.
Yes. And I basically, yes, have that experience. And then also on the other side of it, when I first showed up to Yale in 2015, because of a box that I checked on my application, I got like thrown into the AFAM house on campus, the African American sort of students union, and like went to one event and was like, this is the most awkward I have ever felt in my life because of how I look and how I present and whatever. And so I don't know.
Do you think you're perceived that way? That's an interesting question because I mean, people will say, look, black people have known for a long time that like, who says this? Like race is just a fiction in the sense that there's like people who look white, there's people who are high yellow, there's people, like was your sense, and you probably didn't ask somebody, was your sense
right? No,
that people like, what's this white guy doing here? Or is it like, or is he some like, white South African who thinks that he gets to go to like the AFAM house, but he really doesn't? Do you know?
I have no idea. Let me just say that's all I was thinking about in my head. And I got out of there as quickly as possible because I was just like, this is too, I feel like my psyche is going to collapse. This is too embarrassing for me. But no, so I feel like all of that to say is just like, there's something going on there. And I want, and I don't know, it's just, it's one of these situations where it's like, okay, there are maybe 600,000 Cape Verdeans in Cape Verde, 600,000 here. You have, a classic kind of diaspora situation, a community that, like you just said when I said it to you, like, okay, people have maybe heard it before, but they don't actually know where it's from. And I think you could do something interesting there.
Did your mom look black, by the way?
Yes.
Did you talk to your mom about race? Like what her experience was as somebody who had like, was from this very distinctive culture, looked black, had a son who kind of looked white, was married to a white guy. I mean, did you talk to her about it at all?
Not really, like I'm sure it came up in the indirect or sometimes direct way that these things come up, but not any like real conversation like that. That's one of those like, oh, when you lose a parent young before you're like a full adult, you just don't have the time. You don't even think like, oh, wait, that would be a fruitful
Right.
thing to talk about. You know what I mean? But no, and so that's like part of what, like, I think there's something in a project like this where you could get into these things. It could be a show that is about history, that is about these family members who have all had these different experiences here in this country, you know, and then also like helping to piece together, okay, I have one version of my mom and who she is, but what do all these people, who is she as a sister and as a real person? You know what I mean? And so like,
No, that's a great project. Absolutely. It's the opportunity to have all those conversations you didn't have with her, right? Like,
yeah,
because you didn't think that, you weren't going to have time or something, or you're just too young to be thinking about those things. I'm interested, you mentioned before you checked the box when you're applying to Yale. How do you feel, what's your subjective experience about availing oneself of affirmative action? And I say this as somebody who happily checked the legacy box when I went to Yale and Columbia.
Sure.
So like, this is not from a place of judgment. I would, my advice to everybody is always to, take advantage of whatever, whatever opportunity you have to, get an edge. I'm curious about did you check it when you're applying to grad school? Oh, wait, maybe you couldn't because of the Supreme Court. You could indirectly. Did you write about your Cape Verdean ancestry and your complicated racial identity?
The short answer is yes. Like, I do think I'm kind of just on the side of like, these things are all but impossible to get into.
Yep.
And you pull whatever levers you have. And yes, I think in the grad school situation, the way they have it set up now is like, you still check the box. It's the same, but it says something about like, this is just for data gathering purposes. This does not impact your admission in any way or whatever. So like, they just changed the text. They didn't change the system.
Look, if the son of like the oil tycoon from Nigeria can check the box, then Robert Scaramuccia can check the box, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't know fully how I feel about this. I only have the experience of what I chose to do. And like, I remember when I checked that box for Yale, like at first I did not. And I must have said that to my mom or something. So that's maybe a conversation that we had about race. I remember her, whether it was talking on the phone to a relative or somebody, where she was like, yeah, and he got in and he didn't even check that box. And in my mind, I was like, wait a minute, I did go back and check that box. I just never told her. So I don't know. And that's how I ended up at the AFM house being like, wait a second, am I allowed to be here? So yeah.
Well, you let her have that, right? You let her have that her son got in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all I can try to do is just like, try to become more comfortable with that discomfort. Cause it's just, that discomfort is just like, well, I'm in this country and things are weird here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I hate about affirmative action. It's not that I have very mixed feelings about affirmative action, but one of the things that it's so infuriating about that whole realm is everybody's doing that all the time, right? Like everybody is taking advantage of every edge that they have. I guess there's people who are like, just like out of principle, don't. And it just is such a kind of, I never use gaslighting, or it's just such a crazy making endeavor, right? Because it's like, how much does it suck that there are people who go to Yale or whatever, and they know they wouldn't have gotten in if not for the fact that they were Black and they checked the affirmative action box. And then they just have to walk around, and not everybody does, but some of them walk around with like imposter syndrome, or maybe they feel like totally entitled to be in every space that they're in, but they know with good reason that other people are making assumptions about how they don't deserve to be there. And I did the exact same fucking thing, right? Like I got into Yale because of my legacy status, right? But I don't walk around with the anxiety that anybody assumes, I'm like a Jewish intellectual. Everybody assumes that I'm like smart, right? Like I don't worry about the idea. And it's just like, I had that conversation with my friend Justin Driver, who wrote the book about affirmative action, and he's an advocate of affirmative action. And like one of the points he made was like, I think I brought up, there is that kind of stigma that attaches to people, and it sort of sucks for people. And he's like, you think it's going to go away when we like get rid of affirmative action? Do you think people will stop making assumptions about that? And it's like, it won't go away. And it wouldn't go away even if we knew that the colleges and universities, some of them weren't gaming the system anyway to have a kind of like stealth affirmative action, which some of them are and some of them aren't, but you don't know which ones. You know, if you went to the one that is and is, I mean, whatever. It's just like, I hate it. And I don't know. That's what I hate. And I don't know what the way through is. And sometimes I think the way through is to get rid of affirmative action and try and clear the space. But then sometimes I'm like, I don't actually know if it'll do that. I may be giving the benefit of the doubt too much to my fellow Americans that actually then we will start treating people with the presumption that they like deserve to be in these places. Anyway, sorry, it was just a rant about it, that it is such a head game in a sense.
No, it absolutely is. I think the only thing that comes to mind is just like, this is probably an argument that comes up a lot, and there's probably counter in all aspects of political life. Just that, like, okay, well, if we're going to get rid of it, then can we level the playing field in the K-12 space, for instance? Like, I'm fine with getting rid of affirmative action if everybody gets to go to a great public school or whatever.
Yeah. This was somebody's idea. I forget who it was. I forget if it was Glenn Lowry or maybe it was Roland Fryer or something, but it was one of those kind of heterodox black guys or something who was saying there is so much more, even if you think about the elite universities, like there is so much more they could be doing to be improving the K through 12 education system in their region, right? They could be so much more invested in that. And then whether they then give a leg up to people who are from their part of the country or not, which I think you legally could do or not, it's just like they have all this wealth. They have all of this. They have this tax exemption. They benefit from the infrastructure. I mean, they all do give back in various ways, but just in a really like, they're all in places basically, other than maybe Princeton or something like that, where there are plenty of like kids in shitty public schools who they could benefit enormously by just really taking seriously their commitment to that mission. And that, okay, and then get rid of affirmative action or something like that. But just, they're doing that. I don't know. It seems like there's a million things like that, right? And this is the frustration with the right. When they attack these things and they sometimes have these very clean sort of rhetorical strategies, but it's absent an actual commitment to like heal the wounds of our country and ameliorate the suffering of suffering people. And it's like, fuck you, right?
Yeah. No, it's exactly like, oh, let's end Roe v. Wade, but then that's not actually,
right.
Oh, okay, people are going to have a lot more kids. How do we actually allow them to do that financially or whatever? You know what I mean? It's the same sort of thing where it's just like, I would say the main reason that I'm on the left side of things is like, well, we have to do something, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it feels like the other side is like, it's kind of fine for me and mine, so whatever, and I because of the leftist punk songs I listened to when I was 14, that's just not how I feel.
Right.
And I guess the problem is like, what is that something? But I don't know, man. That's why you have people on Eminent American, so you can figure it out.
Right. I have a different realm of questions related, but I'm thinking about podcasts. I mean, one thing, it's like, it's a pretty new medium. And I think it's interesting to think about. I just wondering if you have any thoughts on this. Like, what are the kinds of things that haven't been done? And I can kind of think of like maybe just off the top of my head, sort of a few realms that could be. One of them is like, I think there's still a lot of concepts to be developed, right? Like I listen to Heavyweight sometimes and like, that is pretty like This American Life, to be fair. But like, there's a lot of those concepts that have yet to be developed. So that's one kind of realm, which is like of concepts. But then there's also like, I'm not sure how mature the whole like fictional podcast audio space is. I know there's been some, the people have done that. I think I've listened to one or two that I liked. And then I don't know, like it feels like most of the kind of audio documentary, serial podcast stuff is pretty similar. And I just I don't know because I haven't thought about it. Like, do you have thoughts on like what are, undiscovered territory in the podcast space?
I mean, I wish I had a great answer to that.
Then you know what to do, right?
Exactly. Then I would know what to do. And as someone who's spent the last few years after college being like, I need to learn this form because this is the only form that makes money or whatever, and that form is either interview show or This American Life in different clothing. But I do think that it is a real issue that so many shows that are scripted are just serial, but it sounds worse.
Right. Right.
Almost everybody is still, other than the people who have been there since the beginning and got laid off from their job at Gimlet or maybe not This American Life, but NPR and its narrative realm or whatever, and are like, screw this, I want to do something totally different. Everybody is still just like doing that. And yeah, it's like, oh, there's only one shape that any of this can take. And like at a certain point, it's like you were saying earlier, like, oh, well, you're not going to do it better than Serial Season 1. You're not going to do it better than S-Town. So I'm not sure, but I do want that to happen. Like, I do think that like there's probably so much more that can be done, and maybe I'm just not listening to the right things, but I think there's so much more that can be done with letting sound lead the way as opposed to narration. even just something like that. And there are things out there that do that, but I think there's probably so much room for play there of like, okay, this is a medium where we're going to put sounds into your head. What if you just heard something like you've never heard before and just go from there? Like just starting with that, oftentimes in scripted podcasts, you when you're trying to script them, you start with the tape. What's my best tape? What's going to light people's minds on fire or whatever? And like, how can you do that? What I would want to figure out how to do, and especially like, I don't know, making something about video games where you're trying to put them in the game world or whatever. How do you lead with this random little like bleep bloop, in a way that won't just totally like turn somebody off and be like, what the hell am I listening to? I don't know the answer there, but I think that like, especially because now podcasting is just people in their rooms making stuff,
right.
They're not to just keep harping on Gimlet, but like it doesn't freaking exist anymore. That was when I graduated from school, that was the dream. You go there, it's a This American Life type studio, but they have private money behind them. So you can get a good salary and whatever.
Wait, does it literally not exist anymore? It's done.
And literally it got bought by Spotify, and then Spotify laid a bunch of people off and turned it into Spotify original programming or whatever. Like the brand doesn't really exist anymore, which is why Heavyweight as a show is now at Pushkin after being canceled at Spotify and whatever. And so basically it's like, okay, well, there's no executives out there anymore who are looking for a certain thing. It's a bunch of people in rooms who have a recording set up and have a computer. Just make something crazy, man.
Yeah,
just make something that hasn't been heard before,
It's interesting. I was thinking one of the best, and I don't actually think this is what you're talking about. I think you're talking about something more subtle or more experimental is the wrong word, because it's not like experimental in the sense that it's only like it would only be for a niche audience, but it's pushing the possibilities of the medium in a more way. One of the best things I've ever heard, one of the best podcasts I've ever heard, it may have been a radio show first, but Radio Open Source, the Chris Lydon?
No.
Anyway, I mean, it's mostly it was a radio show for a long time, and then they claimed to be the first podcast, but they were one of those people who like transitioned to like distributing their radio show, but it was a very produced one. Mostly they do politics and culture. Mostly the guy, Chris Lydon, who did it is an old like Yale WASP type who's in his 70s now, I think. But like mostly it's like politics and books and things like that. But they do some music stuff. They did an episode about the making of Van Morrison's Astral Weeks. And they had access to like all the original like tracks and demos and things like that. And they had interviews with a lot of the session musicians. And they just wove it together. Now, so I say, I don't think it's what you're saying in the sense that it was still a sort of conventional, it was a version of what like Song Splitter does or something like that. But it was so amazingly done, just the weaving together of and there was a kind of higher level where they were weaving in the music. It wasn't just music cut, somebody talking. It was really like sound design. And I'm not even like a big Van Morrison fan. And after that, I'm like, wow, Astral Week sounds amazing. I'm going to go listen. Yep. And I was like, this isn't my thing, whatever. But like, and they did another one that was like 90% as good on Otis Redding, where it was a similar thing they had access to. And it was, it was really amazingly done. You should listen to, at least listen to like the Van Morrison one. It was pretty, but I think what you're talking about, again, it's hard to articulate because you're talking about something that doesn't exist yet, right? It's like something about the oral AURAL environment that's kind of driving I don't know. I think what, I'm sure some people are listening and they're like, well, it's Radiolab or something like that. I'm not enough of a Radiolabophile to know if that's true or not, or kind of what but you're right. There is, I was thinking as you're saying this is just in a different space. It's like, has anybody done a memoir? Like, has anybody done, an 8 or 10 episode memoir where they sort of like, and some of it's talking to their family members or something like that. And it's archival clips, whatever. So maybe the production structure is pretty conventional, but it's just telling that kind of story that way. I don't know.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Like the things that come to mind when you say that, there's this show called Millennial, which is a show by a producer named Megan Tan, who's done a bunch of different things. It was kind of like, here I am. I forget actually the structure now. Maybe she was trying to get an audio job and it's like, okay, well, I'll make a podcast about trying to do that because everything in podcasting also has to be a little bit meta. But I remember listening to it in a similar stage of my life and being like, oh, this is doing what a written memoir would do for me in this stage, which is like, let's explore what it is like to be this exact person and what you draw from it. So yeah, I think there are some, but like there's more to be done there. And again, where you're unfettered by anything. So you can just like, oh, I'm making this thing and I can make it fully sound like me and put it into the world. And as we've been talking about, like that has value in itself.
The questions I want to ask, the just sort of narcissistic questions I want to ask is, after having edited my stuff for the last year or a half, what, if any, observations do you have about me and my podcast that are worth sharing? Or what other questions do you have about, my experience, my perspective?
As a parting podcast producer thing to say, sometimes you do just gotta explain the book or the article that you guys are about to talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right, totally. Note taken.
So, on the one hand, I have that note. On the other hand, I have what I started this with, of just like, it's kind of an incredible thing to just sit down and be like, oh, I'm going to be an hour and a half later and be in a place I didn't expect to go, but it was interesting, at least to me, and it'll be interesting to my listeners. And to be able to do that in this particular podcast environment where, like, let's say 80% of the people doing it are doing it in order to pursue some sort of right-wing grift, so to be able to do that and to come to a place that is like, not that it's left wing or right wing or whatever, but to come to a place that's like still intellectually honest, I guess, of just like, yeah, what is it to just kind of have two minds and just see what happens and to think openly instead of having your canned answers and all of that, So I don't know, keep doing that is what I would say. The only other thing I did want to, as somebody who's been listening to this show as I've been editing it for the past few months, and then also watching the world fall apart outside my window, the thing that I wanted to press you on just like a little bit is I've heard you mention a few times, like, things are pretty bad right now, but American politics is pretty homeostatic, or whatever the word is. Like, in 2028, Gavin Newsom will probably win, or like maybe George Clooney will show up and save us all, because he's a celebrity and whatever. And I just, as somebody who like is reading the headlines about, as someone whose entire, like, the first presidential vote I took was in 2016. And so this has been my entire political life so far. It's just dealing with this crap. And as somebody who like reads the headlines about like, they're looking into maybe nationalizing the voting machinery in blue cities and swing states. And it kind of just seems like there's a dude in office who ran for president again to not go to jail, who then surrounded himself with everybody who's just does whatever he says. Like, I don't know. I'm just kind of classic. I'm on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. And I feel like I just have both of their pessimism about the future and whether things will be okay. And so whenever I hear like, but like, it'll probably be okay, I'm just like, I don't know, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let me think about that. I have a multi-part answer to that, but I think I appreciate you saying it because it is something I struggle with, and I'm sure I have a tendency to sort of Pollyannishness in some sense. Well, let me say a few different things. Of course, I don't know, and none of us know, right? And I want to dignify your perspective that this does feel different. The way that this administration is operating does feel different. We're saying this, I don't know when it's going to come out. We're saying this the day, was it last night or the night before, when Trump had this deadline where he was threatening to do, we don't know what. Was he threatening to drop a nuke? Was he threatening to just drop so many bombs on Iran that he'd kill half the population? He was threatening to do something truly horrifying. Thank God he didn't, right? But like, he might have, and we seem to be, as we're moving along in his term, we seem to be exploring new possibilities of like horrific things happening. And, and even if civilization didn't collapse, even if democracy wasn't over, even if Gavin Newsom was elected in 2028, that doesn't mean that we may not have crossed some thresholds that you can never uncross in a way, right? If we had done that to Iran and killed 50,000 people or something like that, or led to a famine that killed 100,000 people, like, the sense of our country and what kind of place this is just has to change profoundly. Like, there just has to be a grief. We've been there before, right? With like Vietnam or something like that, where we truly brutalized these places. And that is something I have not reckoned with. And I don't know how to reckon with it, like that putting aside the sense of what's coming or how bad it's going to get in terms of like just the general equilibrium for most of our lives. Put that aside for a second. There is a grief, a mourning, a reckoning with the awful things that we've done or that we might do, and how to reconcile that with my sense of wanting to be patriotic and wanting to love my country and wanting to feel proud of being an American. Like, I think there is psychological work that I haven't done. And I don't know how to do it, but I take the point, like, it's a good question for me to think about and to explore. And that is the case. my instinct is still Gavin Newsom or whomever will be elected in 2028. That actually we've been through work, like in terms, if you could sort of take out the kind of pessimistic lens on it, that like we've been through worse things before. There were hundreds of bombings and hijackings in the 70s. The 60s was crazy. We had Vietnam. We had the Civil War. We had World War I. We've had these things that we don't, we talk about all the repression, but it's like if you read American history, like a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, how fascistic it is. And I'm not saying it's not fascistic in its quality, but the scale of it is still much less than interning, however many Japanese people we did, or, chattel slavery, or Jim Crow, or just the illegalization of homosexual behavior and for most of our country's history, or things like that. So I think that we are going to have a basically fair election in 2026. I think we have a basically fair election in 2028. He may try to stop those things. I just don't think he'll succeed. And I think we will have, I do believe that is the case. I do believe our sort of cognitive environment, because of social media, because of 24-hour news, because of all those things, changes the experience of how shitty the world is. And then the part of it that I don't know, and I don't know how to think about, is that then becomes an independent factor in how bad things are, right? So it's like, it's one thing for me to say, well, all this stuff that's actually happening, the reality of it's not that bad. But then there's this other part of it, which is like, if people start feeling badly enough about it, that sort of takes on an independent existence and can lead to its own kind of bad outcome. So I might be underestimating how bad things are going to get because I'm not factoring in that dynamic.
Yeah.
And then the final thing I will say, to your point, is that said, I still think it is optimally psychologically healthy for most of us to try and get more in the space that I'm in than the space that you and your fellow millennials are in, like just in an individual sense. It's one of those things. It's like that thing about, the danger of like presenting oneself as a victim, or understanding oneself as a victim, even if in fact you're being victimized, it's just to your own detriment, right? It just sort of costs you in terms of sense of agency. Like people who believe that they're not a victim, they believe that they have a sense of agency, believe that none of the obstacles in society can hold them down, will just do better individually. So at an individual level, you want to have a sense of agency and non-victimization, even if it is the truth that you or your people or whomever are being victimized. And I somewhat feel similarly, which is one will have more agency in the world, will be happier, and actually will ultimately be more empowered to do real change if you have that sense that the world is not ending. I think that most of the time the sense that the world is ending is kind of disempowering and de-energizing. So I would still say that. I would defend my kind of broad stance, while at the same time recognizing there are probably some things that would actually be really productive for me in the context of this podcast to deal with. What do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that, like, in some sense, to put a bow on it, like that is part of why I want to go back to school.
Yeah.
Because I think about how, even if you just take since the 2024 election, where it's like, oh, I and other people with similar casts of mind or similar anxieties or whatever, the creativity has been kind of sucked out of the room for me. And the curiosity about other people, really, I think it's very easy to be like, these people suck, or these other people suck, or whatever, or they think I suck. And it's just not, it hasn't been the place that my personal mind needs to be in order to like create something that like adds some dignity to the world, or is just good for art's sake, or whatever, and like I don't know, like I hate to say it, but like this asshole's taken enough. Like I don't want him to take that as well, and so I'm really like just trying to get to this point where like, oh no, I can also have some of what you have in that sense, whether it's real optimism or functional optimism, because it's what allows you to keep making interesting, curious things. That's where I want to get to, and I'm hoping that we're on that road. Yeah.
I hesitate to even make this case because it feels like me wanting to have my cake and eat it too. Like I will say, like I think as a general rule, like panic kind of narrows the aperture or something. It narrows the capacity for imagination, right? And so even if we want to think politically and think about how kind of we can sort of evolve into a different, sort of a healthier culture or healthier political ecosystem or something like that, there is a real danger in kind of lack of imagination. And, I feel like, a lot of my criticism of the left is like, it seems like so many people just keep running the same scripts over and over again. And I'm like, it just doesn't work. Like, what do you like
Yeah.
for who and to what end? And it's like to the point where I'm just like, you're really just indulging yourself, right? Like there's some psychological value in it. There's value in being a victim. There's value in like standing up and, holding your fist up in the air and marching and protesting and things like that. And I'm like, well, why aren't you thinking creatively, right? Well, there's some reason why people are not thinking creatively or thinking innovatively or thinking about the kind of brass tacks of like, when have movements been successful in the past? What were the, factors in their favor? What were the factors against them? What strategies might be more efficacious right now? And it's like, and then, I mean, the right, I don't even know what to say about the right? Like so many of them seem so just immersed in their own misery and sense of victimization and anger and resentment. And even there, it feels like we need new cultural resources. And I don't know. And the trick is, it's like, they don't tend to come when they're like laser like focused on what the hoped for outcome is. But I think like cultural energy produces, like expands the imaginative space of a society. And so even when you're thinking about people on the right, it's like we need new narratives, new cultural narrative, new cultural resources that can encompass those people and help draw them out of these sort of vats of resentment and bitterness and something like that. And I actually do believe, I just don't know how it works. Like, I think it works best when we do the thing is like we kind of try and figure out what we have to say in the world, right? Like, that's how I think it works best. But like, I can't really tell you what the mechanism is. It doesn't always produce that outcome. I just like, I have this very acute sense that in our culture right now, it's like we need new imaginative resources. And I think that comes more from adopting this sort of paradigm or temperament that you and I have been talking about than from obsessing about all the world's ills and all the awful people and all those things.
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, not to go like too Pollyannish on my end, like I do think that if somehow we are in a world in the next few years where either everyday people can find a way to feel more curious and joyful and to approach the problems of the country and the world with that attitude, as silly as that sounds to say right now in 2026, or a candidate who can encapsulate some of that. Like I guess at my fundamental lefty core, like do believe people will see that and maybe think, well, this is more fun than like the shit we've just been in for 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, sure, there's like certain satisfactions that come from pushing down other people in order to step up yourself. But like, fundamentally, I do think there is still like an American spirit there. That's like the only thing that was worthwhile in the past 10 years was the Artemis 2 flyby that just happened.
Yeah.
And like, not that we only just have to put money into the space program, but like a certain, I hate myself saying this, but like a can-do-itiveness or whatever. I don't know. If somebody can crack that code, hell yeah, let's go for it.
It's funny. I was going to say the thing I was going to fill in the blank. You're like the only thing that's been worth, anything in the last 10 years. It's just the thing that popped into my head was like South Park. It's just like, and I've been in and out on South Park. I just thought some of the stuff they did in the last season with like the Trump administration was so funny. And like, and it's funny because it's like, it's so political in a sense, but like, you just know, like those guys are just like, where can we have the most fun?
Yeah.
And it's like this image of the White House door looking like more and more like a haunted mansion, right? And the door opening up, and Stephen Miller is like this Igor, like hello, and it's just like I don't know if that did anything politically. Like if it did, it was for the best. It kind of punctured, but like it's just joyful, right? It's just sort of joyful and in its way, kind of beautiful, and Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking it's like, if you went and let's say you went and made your sort of, My Cape Verde and Family podcast or something like that. And it went really well or something and you won some awards or you got some listenership. I mean, it's funny to even imagine what that would like. So much of the framing would be political, right? Like so much of the framing, so much of the plaudits you would get would be explicitly or implicitly, look at this good work he'd done. But it will in fact only work. It will only work if you go into it and you're like, I just want to understand, like, I want to understand my family. I want to understand this place. I want to understand my legacy. Maybe I want to understand what race means to somebody like me. Like, it will only work if you actually do it in this sort of authentic, genuine way. And then you'll put it out into the world. And because it happens to be about this topic that has all these narratives around it, people are like, Robert, this is so wonderful, right? And it's like, and you'll accept it, of course. You'll accept, oh, thank you. I am so brave. Whatever. I'm very fortunate. Whatever. But like, it'll work because you were in it, right? And you were adhering to your vision of what it was.
And in my head, I will, in the back of my mind, if that were to all happen, I'd be like, and really, I just wanted to hear like some funny stories from my aunts and uncles.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
And that's ultimately, that is what this is.
Or I wanted to understand my mom better, right? My mom is not with me anymore, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Well, I mean, it's time to say goodbye, Robert, except, of course, we're going to see each other in like a week or two for an audio recording session. But let me know how so you're going to make another visit to grad school, or you've made as many visits as you can?
I have a visit that starts tomorrow.
Okay.
It will be the last visit, and then we will have our two MFA choices.
Okay.
And we will go from there, and it'll determine the trajectory of the next 50 years, presumably. So it'll be great.
Well, good luck. I hope it makes itself evident to you. I hope you don't have to agonize. I hope you go and you're like, aha, yes, this is the answer.
Thank you. That would be the dream.
All right. Well, goodbye for now, but not really goodbye. But thank you for all your work on this podcast. I really appreciate it. I think it's enabled me to elevate it, and you were underpaid throughout. So I appreciate the gift of your additional time and your collaboration, your help with making this good. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Dan, for making it an easy show to edit. And you also paid me in learning more about fashion than I ever thought I would when I first showed up. So at least there's that.
There you go. You're welcome. This has been another episode of Eminent Americans. Big thanks to my editor, producer extraordinaire, Robert Scaramuccia. Big thanks as well to Alec Ownsworth of Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah, for letting us use his music for our intro and outro. If you liked what you heard, and I imagine you did, if you've made it this deep into the episode, then please rate us on whatever the relevant podcasting platform is. And if you have any questions or comments, email me at djops@gmail.com. That's djopps@gmail.com. I promise to respond at least until the faraway and probably mythical day when I have such a vast audience that I can't in good conscience respond to all the emails while still upholding my responsibility to my loved ones. Have a great day.